young George Clooney. Really, George Clooney of any age. But,
Blah, 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 boom.
oh my goodness. Dream City.
Hey everybody, welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb.
We're going through all these pilots, and today's pilot is ER. So, as I like to do, I like to set things temporally and make sure people know what the time frame is for when this is happening.
Kevin was not aware it was a show. So, our producer, Kevin.
He knew it was a show.
He knew it was a show.
He just didn't know that it was a big show.
He knew, yeah. He thought it was a failure.
So, ER debuted on September 19th, 1994. At that time, the number one song of the month, I guess that's the month of September, was I'll Make Love to You by Boyz II Men, which I know is one of your favorite songs. You love songs about who's going to do what to whom.
I like a lot of specificity.
Yeah.
So I know, wait a minute. Who's making love to who?
What is this person going to do? Make love.
Right.
To whom?
Yes.
You. Who? I.
Right.
Most famous baseball player, Kevin dug this up. The most famous rookie baseball player in the world at that time was Michael Jordan. That was a very difficult time for American sports and resulted in a documentary about he'll take the bus or something like that.
Both for basketball players and for rookie baseball players that were being overshadowed.
Can you imagine the hubris it takes to go, you know what? I'm the best player in the world at this one sport, but it's so boring to me. I'm going to try this other thing.
Yeah. I kind of feel like, whatever. Why not have
I've climbed this mountain. I want to do another one.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, and I'm sure this is on record, did he think, okay, now I'm going to be the best baseball player? Or
I'm sure he did.
It's just that's the level of confidence you need to be Michael
I think
Jordan.
so,
And therefore,
yeah,
well, then that's insane. But if he's just like, I don't know, why not? Why not do this other thing that every boy dreams of? I already did the first thing every boy dreams of.
So September 19th. Now, what's kind of incredible as far as September of 1994 is I just want to talk about a couple other things that debuted right around the same time. Now, one thing was the day before ER's pilot aired September 19th, on September 18th, a pilot for Chicago Hope aired.
That's fascinating to me because I would think that definitely was created in the wake of ER.
And they both came out at the same time.
Yeah.
And, we all knew Mandy Patinkin from
Broadway.
Well, from the Rob Reiner movie, Princess Bride.
Sure.
But, Chicago Hope led to his entire Criminal Minds and Homeland and whatever else. Has he done anything else?
Decades-long career, Mandy Patinkin.
Things worked out for him. So that was on September 18th. So September 18th, Chicago Hope. September 19th was ER. September 22nd, 1994 was a show you may be familiar with called Friends.
Oh, wow.
So 3 nights apart, ER and Friends did. That is pretty wild as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, particularly because, and it's always difficult to say.
Because all the people in ER were friends.
Because they were friends, and then they were friends
People at Chicago
with
Hope
the
were
friends
friends.
people.
Yeah.
I thought the Chicago Hope people hated everyone.
No, but among themselves.
They're friends. Sure. I mean,
you can't work at Chicago Hope. Also, it's interesting to me. I didn't even think of this, but ER is in Chicago, which I didn't really know until I watched this pilot. And I was like, oh, the loop, Chicago, the cops have the uniforms of Chicago. And Chicago Hope was also Chicago. Apparently, Chicago is known for
hospitals. Except it's in Chicago. It's about a hospital.
Hey, let me tell you, we got the best hospitals here in Chicago, okay? The Bears, the Bulls, hospitals.
Deep dish hospitals, we call them.
On top of those shows, also September 1994, Party of Five debuted.
Really enjoyed it.
I never watched it. Did you?
Scott Wolf, Matthew Fox.
Yeah.
The debut of Jennifer Love Hewitt as one of the recurring characters.
Right.
Neve Campbell.
Right. And you liked the show.
I enjoyed the show very much.
Yeah, I was not. I just never watched it. And Touched by an Angel. Were you a fan?
Sean hates orphans. This is a classic Sean Conroy trait.
Don't get me started on David Copperfield.
Yeah. Hates Harry Potter.
Oh, what a nightmare. Of course he has a scar on his forehead.
He would kick Oliver Twist if he saw him in the street.
You may not have some more. Absolutely not. So, a crazy month for television, and ER is, I don't know, is it the best show that comes out of that time? Is it the worst? I don't know.
It's one of those two.
And or it's
you'll be able to vote later on our Twitter. Tip line. You got to get a tip line for this thing. It was certainly one of my top favorite shows of the era. I think particularly at that time, I don't know that I was as much of this kind of hour-long show, certainly not medical shows to my memory, but I was instantly in from the pilot.
Right.
And watching this again, I was like, man, I can really see why. It's just one of the most well-crafted, well-designed pilots in television history. And I'm curious what your original experience was with ER.
I don't know that I had a real original experience with ER. Like, I don't think I ever saw the pilot until I watched it for us.
Yeah.
And I was definitely not somebody who watched it on a regular basis back when it was on TV. I mean, my only experience with ER was I played a lot of basketball every week when I was teaching junior high school, which, humble brag. Really? Is that a brag?
Yeah, we get it. You were active.
It was a long time ago. But one of the guys we played, for some reason you're obsessed with the fact that I blew up my knees, which is not the case. But somehow you have me confused with somebody who has bad knees. The same way that you're obsessed with the fact that I am a bird watcher when in fact I am not. Andy is a guy who hears something about one person and then is obsessed with that about another person.
I mean, I can't deny that. But I just think Sean seems like a bird watcher with bad knees.
Yeah, it's very hard to get out in the forest and see those birds when you can barely walk.
Mostly just standing and looking with binoculars.
You got to get there in the first place. What am I going to do? Take a hovercraft? But one of the guys we played basketball with on a regular basis, who was a really good basketball player, like one of those guys who's like 6'8" and can shoot from outside, but was an actor. He was an aspiring actor, and he was cast on an episode of ER, and he played like a neonatologist on ER. And because Clooney and Anthony Edwards were such big basketball players, used to play all the time at lunchtime, they had him there for one episode, and they were like, oh my God, this guy is so fun to play with. And they kept him on for like a season and a half just so they can have him around to play basketball.
Fucking 6'8" guys with an outside shot. They get all the breaks in professional sports and in acting. Like, there's no way to beat them.
But so that was my knowledge about ER, was that it was this show in Hollywood that this guy had gone off and started to do, but I never watched the show myself.
Oh, I was obsessed with it for various reasons, which we'll discuss. But just going back to the origin of it, what's fascinating is that Michael Crichton, how much do you know about Michael Crichton?
I know that he is quite a good writer of suspense novels.
Oh, yeah.
That he went
up your alley.
Medical school.
Yes. And was a resident for a time.
He was incredibly successful.
Actually, I don't know if he was a resident. He definitely was in an ER. Just giant sci-fi novels. Obviously wrote the novel and the screenplay for Jurassic Park is probably his biggest claim to fame, but also wrote and directed the original Westworld. And have you seen The Great Train Robbery?
I love The Great Train Robbery.
See, that was I was thinking. I was like, oh, I wonder if Sean. That seems like that would be. I mean, a lot of things are Venn diagrams for me and John, but that's definitely in the zone of like cynical, well-crafted story, historical.
I love a heist movie, and a historical heist movie is like even better.
So we'll be doing that in our Golden Pyramid tier of our Patreon. So check that out. Just obviously huge writer. Prior to this, had written this in at least IMDb, who knows what's dependable, said that it was originally called EW, Emergency Ward. And John Wells, the showrunner of ER, said it was called Emergency Department. So.
Well, to be fair, when it was called Emergency Ward, that was a reference to Ward Cleaver. It was Emergency, Ward, and it was about, Leave It to Beaver.
Sequel to Leave It to Beaver, where Cleaver then becomes I mean, it would have been the craziest spin. Wasn't that how the Mary Tyler Moore Grant?
Yeah. It's a spin-off. Yeah.
It was a spin-off. I just took the characters, which I assume we'll do one of those at some point.
Sure.
Maybe both. Maybe it'll be a double episode. Anyway.
What more could you ask for than a double episode of this show?
You guys are clamoring. You already said nothing about what we've done so far. We assume you want double.
Right.
Anyway, he'd written this, Crichton had, as a feature-length script. He was unable to get it produced. Steven Spielberg contacted him about it in 1989. He wanted to turn it into a movie.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second and say that he wrote it in 1974. So
Correct.
Spielberg got in touch with him about it 15 years later.
And it was specified, again, I don't know if it's true or not, that it was inside a vault, a steel vault. And it was just like, I want to hear more about that. The Michael Crichton, like,
The screenplay vault. And
no one must see
yeah.
this. Michael Crichton, also the giant man. FYI.
Yeah, 6'8",
Unbelievable. Fucking tall people. How tall are you, Sean?
6'9".
Look at you. Dude, you're doing a podcast with me.
I can't hit an outside shot. That's
Oh, is that the distinction? Where were you? Where were you strong? You were in the man in the middle?
No, I was great from the bench. Come on, guys, let's go.
That's those knees. So anyway, Spielberg contacts him. I think he's not sure. Amblin gets in touch with John Wells, who was coming off Giant Beach, medical show with the historical spin. And
China Beach was what, Vietnam?
correct.
Right.
And he says, this is fantastic. They're like, you got to get Michael Crichton. I don't know why Michael Crichton would be like, no, I don't want that.
He's like,
money.
I'm still living off my residuals from Sphere.
But apparently, the executives, the top brass at NBC, were not interested, and they only were thinking, we'll make this because he's so hot off of Jurassic Park. We can kind of sell it off of that. I don't know how you're getting the Jurassic Park fans for this medical show, but that's their reasoning. And I guess
A lot of people were badly injured during Jurassic Park, so it just makes sense that they would then go see doctors.
I mean, I would like to see the show where it's people just coming off, just continually throughout the 15 seasons.
Emergency, Lord.
Here I am. It was a perfect ward cleaver. You probably nobody can remember, but that was a perfect ward cleaver.
Kevin is a big Ward Cleaver fan.
He doesn't know that much about your success, but he's very familiar with Leave It to Beaver. I'm really dragging out this history, which I claimed I was not going to do, but I keep digging in because I'm like, I wonder what the background was. So anyway, then they said, all right, we'll give you some money to shoot it. It's a rush job. They say to John Wells, he's like, sure, I'll do a just rush job. He also had a show passed on that would have precluded this from ABC. So that's just the kind of turns a career could take in the entertainment industry. That's that's insane to me. But another thing might have been picked up. I assume there's no way it could have been as successful as this 15-season run of VR. And he might not have been attached. It might have gone forward without him after it was shot. So anyway, did you have something you were saying?
Only that, yes, that is how crazy a career could be in Hollywood, but also the fact that it took 15 years for Spielberg to express interest in the screenplay, and then it didn't get made into anything until it was made into a TV show 20 years after it was written. Like, my whole thing, and I guess this is because, I came up as an improviser, is like, as soon as you put something out there, you're done with it. It's over.
Right.
And meanwhile, Michael Crichton has a fucking vault that he keeps his stuff in, and is like, would anybody like to see something I wrote 20 years ago?
Just a correction. IMDb said metal safe, so I don't know if the veracity. I don't know if I was right or wrong on that. But
Yeah.
Either way, I mean, if it's a walk-in, he's 6'8". That's got to be a giant metal safe.
Assuming that the door is giant as well. It could be that he has to duck his head to get in.
It is possible.
I also like that you call the people in charge of networks the top brass, as if they're like generals or something.
Well, I like to make everything in my life seem as military as
Yeah.
possible. It gives it meaning. Also, interestingly, the lower brass, what do you call them
The
in
copper?
military terms? Yeah, the copper, the 10. They apparently all loved it. The likes of John Landgraf and Kevin Riley then later became the top brass. But whatever the case, because they were like, hey, whatever, just make this as a TV movie, that's why they got no notes. It's a recurring theme. that I'm sure we're going to keep running into that are specific situations that influence there being less of a stranglehold on the creative process. By the same token, this is an aspect that I am just obsessed with, because to me, one of the defining things that make this show a success is the tone that obviously comes from the script. And I mean, we're going to get into the breakdown of how it's structured, but just the tone immediately, the vibe visually, which was very unique at the time and employed Steadicam in a heavy way that to my knowledge was not really employed up till that point. And the manicness,
Constant movement.
And a lot of that came out of the budgetary restrictions and the time restrictions. And so Rod Holcomb, who directed the pilot China Beach, and John Wells had brought him in, and shockingly never, to my knowledge, directed another pilot in his career. So I'm just like, direct the pilot from ER and they don't bring you in on every pilot from that point forward is just shocking to me. Like, it's a character. It is the breadth of this show is how the show moves. And he does it because he was just like, well, we don't have time. Let me just grab the Steadicam and we'll do this all in a lot of long takes.
But in defense of the brass who never brought him in to direct another pilot, I agree with you that the whole world thing is incredible in the show. But if you have an older establishment way of looking at things, one thing that stood out to me was like, it was really dark a lot of the time.
Right.
Just lighting wise, you couldn't see a lot of stuff.
Right.
And I could see somebody looking at it and going, why is it so goddamn dark all the time?
It is a recurring thing. And actually, on a pilot that I did, that was I kept wanting to make it, because it was taking place in a Brooklyn apartment. I kept wanting to make it look like a Brooklyn apartment. And they kept saying,
like, brighten it up, brighten it up. Yeah. But I can't imagine a real ER is that dark all the time. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, this is another thing of just, the good fortune of happenstance. The reason it was lit that way is also because of their time constraints.
It takes too long to light it.
They went in there, and so they just did general lighting so that Rod could kind of shoot it, back and forth and switch the shots of like you're on one side of the gurney and you're on the other side of the gurney. It's just like, so you just really inhabit the space. And you're totally right. It's kind of dingy because they were shooting in an old hospital, and then they just duplicated that for, when they were able to get on in studio sets.
Right.
So just really amazing.
And,
fortune.
Obviously, if you've been on set, you know that the lighting is the thing that takes the most time ever. It's always about spending inordinate amount of time trying to get lighting exactly right. So if you don't have time, that's the first thing you're going to spend less time on.
Of course. So yeah, I kind of prodded through the pilot script where Mark Green is originally Richie Green. I wonder if that was a legal issue or if they were like, Richie doesn't lend him enough authority.
It makes him sound like he's got a lot of money.
Richie Rich?
Just Rich. The word Rich is in there. I didn't think of the Richie Rich connection. Forget it. We ain't calling him Richie. Mark just makes it sound like he has a mark on his body.
You're very literal, Gary.
That's why my name is Gary.
What does Gary stand for, Gary?
Nothing. Otherwise, it would have been distracting.
Oh, I see. So anyway, I was saying I was prodding through the script. It just says tracking green at the beginning, and that's about the only reference to kind of moving through the space. Now, he does write it in a way where the scenes are kind of continuous, so it's possible that that was what he had in mind. But it seems like it was just, this was convenient, and then they created this tone of shows, as far as I remember. Anyway, that's the background.
Okay, so let's talk about the pilot itself. And I guess I feel like this is a little different than some of the other pilots we've looked at, because I always look at shows in terms of plot. Like, I always am fascinated by what's the story they're telling in the pilot.
Right.
And this show felt like it didn't, certainly there was a story for several of the characters, but it was so much more about building the world and letting us know who these characters were than it was about anything interesting happening in their lives.
I think that is generally true. I think that there are big exceptions in this pilot, and I think that's, and I think we'll talk about them as we get into it. But that is one thing that's fascinating, is that the through line, it's completely driving. It's not like you don't feel like the story is moving forward.
Correct.
But it's almost subtextual.
Right. But I would say that the drama is really happening to the people coming into the emergency room, which makes sense because those are the people who are in the worst moments of their lives.
Right.
Or what they consider to be the worst moments of their lives, or not that big a deal moments of their lives that they think are important enough to go to the emergency room. But all of those people are the ones that are having the high drama, as opposed to the main characters who are operating at this level all the time.
Right.
So I just wanted to talk through who these main characters are. I feel like that's the way to look at this pilot is we have this, well, let's talk about the world, first of all, because I feel like the first, 10, 12 minutes of the show are just about establishing what it's like to be in the emergency room.
Yeah. And it's such an impressive way.
Yeah. And it starts with Dr. Green, who's asleep, and he gets woken up, then he gets woken up again. And we go through just all the stuff that he has to deal with over the course of the morning as he's coming awake and dealing with everybody that's coming into the emergency room.
And you immediately, you're thrown into it. The thing that sort of has been consistent in a few we've looked at already that are classic, well-written pilots is there is always a pressure to establish exposition in the world fast. This is just a masterclass in terms of how well it sets up the vibe, the world, with so little dialogue or explanation.
Right.
He just wakes up. He keeps getting woken up. He's got an impossible job.
He deals with crisis after crisis after crisis. And I forget if it's the final moment of that opening or whatever, is a guy has died of a heart attack and the son attacks him.
I think that's later on in the show.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah. But it's just like that first 11 minutes is insane. And just even those first moments, the nurse isn't like deferential to Dr. Green.
Right.
She's annoyed because there's another doctor, who we find out is George Clooney, is Dr. Ross, who is drunk. And he goes in to take care of him. Dr. Ross is asking questions about how things are going with Green's wife. We don't know what the deal is. We don't know any specifics. These are questions that are raised in our head more than anything else. And we don't need to know what it is then. Everything's moving forward. We're interested. We're following along, but we're getting little nuggets to kind of pique our interest and give us information.
And this is, who knows what order these things are going to air in, but we talked about the idea of a mystery box show.
Yes.
This does not feel like that, even though what you're saying is kind of similar to what we were saying about that type of show, which is, it's all these questions and we don't need to know the answers. We'll come to those eventually.
Right.
But on this show, it doesn't feel like, this is one of those types of shows. It just feels like these are people having real conversations where we're sort of on board for the ride and we will understand what they're talking about at some point during the episode.
And I think you kind of put a point on what mystery box shows really are driven by, because it's just basically good storytelling. It's asking a question that the audience wants to lean forward and hear the answer to. Mm-hmm. It's just mystery box is much more of a MacGuffin-y kind of way of handling it. Hitchcockian term for just whatever the device is, the hero has to resolve, usually technological, but it could be anything that's just created for the purposes of story. So that can be what a mystery box is. Mystery boxes are more often satisfying if it's like, that it really is a higher revelation about the world of the characters. But it's interesting putting it in the context you're talking about it, Sean, because even the smallest thing that we don't know about the character can be a mystery box. So you could just say asking those kind of questions is good storytelling as long as it's handled in the right way.
Right. You always want the story to sort of unfold as opposed to going like, okay, so we're doctors in an ER, and guess what? One of us is drunk and one of us isn't. So we're going to fix that. And then we'll get to the fact that you have problems in your marriage.
And even on the thing you're just sort of saying, he's sort of telling a story to his friend about meeting a woman. So we kind of get the sense that he's a little bit of a dog. And young George Clooney, really, George Clooney of any age. But,
blah, 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 boom.
Oh, my goodness. Dream City. Dreamy City? What's appropriate?
I think it's actually Sleepy Town.
It can't be. Anyway, she says, I didn't know pediatricians were so sexy. So he drops in the middle of his story about some lady he met, that he's a pediatrician.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh, he's a pediatrician, but he's also maybe got an alcohol problem. But then by the end of the scene, Mark.
He's very good at his job.
Sure. Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
This show as a whole.
I need 200 milligrams of X. Fat. It's like, oh, okay. He's a drunk, but he's also really good at what he does.
I mean, this show, it could have been like Save the Cat in the ER. It's just every person has their moment of just being a hero, and which is just what the genius of it. It's why this thing went 15 seasons.
Right.
Chicago Hope, classically, everybody knows that every patient died, and that's the reason that didn't succeed.
That's why Patinkin became such a derided name in the industry.
Your speeches about that's why we have to let this person die.
He killed a lot of patients. So, yes, there was exposition in there. We found out this guy was this and this guy was that, but it wasn't about anything but going, this is the world we're gonna live in for the next. I'm sure they didn't know at the time. The time they were like, this is the world we're gonna live in for the next 6 episodes. They didn't know it was gonna be 270 episodes or whatever.
I mean, and none of it's spelled out. So then we meet Dr. Lewis, Dr. Susan Lewis, played by Sherry Stringfield, who I was completely obsessed with and in love with at the time. I'm kind of a basic person, and that often the shows where I'm like, oh, I was obsessed with that show. I'll be like, because that lady was fine. And the proof of that is, I'm ashamed to say, I think as soon as spoiler alert, in case you haven't watched the run and you want to, VR, she eventually leaves the show, and I stopped watching as soon as she
You were
left the
done as
show.
soon as she left.
A lot of it was because of an investment in another storyline that I'm not going to spoil. But whatever the case, Susan Lewis is introduced, and I like how in all forms of media, but especially this show, they call out how beautiful the beautiful people are, and like the patient is immediately kind of hitting on her and saying, the beautiful doc, she's just like doing her job and is like very kind of Mr. Spocky about it and says, thank you. She's very married. No, I'm a doctor. Sort of a joke about how busy doctors are. Well, then listen, careful. You wouldn't want to fall on your face twice in one day. She handles the situation. She gets out of the situation, moves on to her next task. And it's like, that's all we need to know about Susan Lewis. It's,
Is that all we need to know about Susan Lewis? Because I feel like watching the pilot, she's the character that I knew the least about.
Well, do we want to jump ahead? If we're going out of order, we want to jump ahead?
Why don't we start with her character? Because she does have some crucial information to get out over the course of the episode with an uncredited guest star, but I feel like she was the least explored of all the characters.
Which uncredited guest star are you?
Miguel Ferrer.
Oh, was he not credited?
No.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, what a champion, Miguel Ferrer.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just so, I forgot completely that he was in the pilot. So you got that scene. And okay, so let's talk about this. Because
that's the one thing she does in the whole pilot that feels really important. Because that to me is the scene that sets up, and it almost felt a little heavy-handed, which is why you need Miguel Ferrer to be in there to make the scene effective. But it's like basically saying, I forget exactly how she says it, but she's like, nothing good is certain, nothing bad is certain, nothing is certain. And that to me sets up the theme of the entire series.
Well, that's what's amazing. I just feel like it's such a well-written pilot in terms of how they space things out, how they balance the deep drama with comedic moments, with character moments. That's about 3/4 of the way through the show. You've already, I guess the scene after that is the one where Mark Green, the guy thinks he has cancer. It's this sort of the sort of twin to that scene where the guy doesn't have cancer but keeps insisting he has cancer. So like this comedic moment after that. So it's just so impressive. But to me, that the handling of that scene is we're almost a little bit unsettled because she seems like she's in such a practical doctor distant mode.
She's like, we don't know anything yet. We can't tell for sure. We don't know what's going on.
In a verging on, or some might argue, completely cold way.
Yeah. But the guy is like just tell me how much time I have. And she finally cracks at the end.
Yeah. What's interesting is that this is a show where the guest stars are handed the ball
Yeah.
in a way that I don't even know what other shows do, of just like, hey, you're going to command this high drama scene. You're coming in for a couple of days at most.
You have one scene.
Yeah, probably just a day.
I mean, the guy who beats up and then cries in the arms of Dr. Green,
Yeah.
he had one scene,
Yeah.
but it was a huge moment. And this Miguel Ferrer scene is a huge moment, and that's his only scene in the show. And there were lots of people like that, you know?
So what was your experience watching that scene?
I guess I just sat there and I thought it went in a direction I did not expect. I did not expect her to admit that he only had 6 months to live.
Right.
That she, it felt like she was almost being avoidant in that moment of like, I don't want to be the one who tells this guy that he doesn't have a lot of time left.
Uh-huh.
And then he was so insistent and he could tell there was more going on. And he was like, just tell me. And she told him, and it was it was an intense moment. And then he's so relieved to know, because he's like, I can do the things I want to do with my wife, and I know that I have to do them now.
I mean, that's an interesting sort of angle on it, is that she gave him information that was sort of useful for how he was going to live his life from this point forward.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it wasn't avoidance emotionally, although I think you're right that is, in the end, the meaning of the scene for her character. But I just sort of saw it as, it's kind of exactly what she says. It's like, said nothing is certain, nothing that seems very bad, nothing that seems very good.
Right.
You're totally right. That launches us on the whole series.
It's 270 episodes.
It's built up to in a completely organic way. It doesn't feel like you're grinding to a halt. And there's so many things that are tossed off that in another show would have been underlined and have a shot in close up and whatever. And
we can't do the close up. There's no lights.
Oh, that was another reason. There are close-ups. I didn't mean to imply that the whole show is one take, but that would be amazing to do in an hour-long show. It would be such a nightmare. So anyway, it's just really impressive. And I think the handling of the scene from her side, and I would love to know from Sherry.
Do you want to get in touch with her?
I just feel like Sherry Stringfield and I would have a lot, in common. Let's talk about it.
Just so you know, I stopped watching the show.
I stopped watching the show. That's after minute where are you going?
She would be like, now are you the bird watcher with that?
That's what she would say. Anyway, so the thing that I think it illuminates for her character, for me at least in that moment, is because we are already kind of trying to figure out more about Dr. Lewis, and she's just someone who keeps her cards close to the vest. And in that moment, it's just like this person who has this emotional, outburst and hugs her. And she's clearly like a bit uncomfortable and doesn't know how to respond. And it's sort of not going according to her game plan. He even apologizes and walks out. And like, that's where we can see that to a certain degree, I don't know that she's shirking responsibility, but I think she handles the amount of pain in this job
incredible
by shutting it off.
Yeah.
And this was a situation where she was forced not to. And what's interesting is later when she says to Dr. Green, and I didn't check in the script, and I wonder if there is a scene like this, can we get coffee? They're already talking about other stuff. I don't remember which Dr. Green issue he was talking about in that when they're getting coffee.
He wanted some CCs of something.
That's right. She reaches into a purse and she hands it to him. But they're not talking about that scene. And it's only sort of my extrapolating like, oh, I guess she probably wanted to talk about that. And I wonder if they had it and then it was too much, or that wasn't what she wanted to talk about. She just wanted to connect with them. Like, it's interesting. It's not touched on again.
Right.
So it's really interesting.
Right. And you think about that in terms of the lives. I don't quite know how to articulate this, but that's what we're talking about, is that all of these people coming into the hospital are in the worst moments of their lives.
Right.
And these are what the doctors are dealing with on a constant basis. And that's what leads to what is interesting about the show, which is what happens when you have to deal with the worst things that have ever happened to people and you're dealing with your own life.
It's funny that we were sort of joking about every patient dying on Chicago Hope, but
Was it funny? I think it was. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. I thought I was going to get kicked off this podcast for a second. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people die in this show, and they don't dwell on it every time. And to a certain degree, at some points, after the building exit, just like, no, they were DOA. And as a matter of fact, this is a moment that I would say could have been played when Juliana Margulies says, Dr. Green goes, "That's it," Anthony Edwards. And Juliana Margulies says, the last two were DOA. Oh, so that's it. And she goes, "Yeah, for now." And it's like 100% in someone else's hands, you would have had her turn around and close it. Yeah, for now. But it's just like, you just sent it over her shoulder. One might argue that's the thing that is revealed. That's the piece that we need to figure out what's going to happen or why she does what she does later in the show. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now.
Sure, we can talk about that. Dr. Nurse Margulies.
Nurse Hathaway.
Hathaway, who is, again, there's a whole established moment of how competent she is, right? She's walking down the hallway and people are like, "Carol, can I get this? Carol, hey, Carol, we need this. Carol, we need Carol. Carol, you need to do this thing. Carol, fill out this form. Carol."
I mean, it's one of the funniest scenes in the pilot. People are popping out of little half doors, like in a Swiss cottage. People are,
"Carol, suck it to me."
There's a Muppet coming in from the ceiling.
But it is about establishing like that she knows what she's doing. And then I think it's the end of that scene or at some point thereafter when she has a conversation with Dr. Ross.
Right.
And we find out that they have a pre-existing relationship, which is no longer going on.
Another beautifully subtle exposition that's laid out. And it's also, they depended on, I would like to go back into the script and see, it seems like it depends mostly on their chemistry and unspoken flirtation.
Right.
Because if you do look at the script, there's a lot of things that are, and this will often happen in pilots, that are overwritten and then were lost either on set or were lost in editing. Because they're like, well, I don't need this.
Right. So we find out that those two have some connection. They're not together anymore. She's going to marry a football player or something like that.
Yeah. Or at least he has the body of a linebacker. I don't remember if he actually is a football player.
Right. Well, I think he was a defensive lineman with the body of a linebacker or something like that.
That's right. Until he quit to become a rookie in professional baseball or minor league.
He was not the most famous rookie in the baseball world at the time.
One of the reasons he was so mad was Michael Jordan overshot.
Even though Jordan wasn't that good, he was better. But
yeah.
What can you do? So,
let's digression. So later in the episode, jingle for that.
Later in the episode, we find out that she has overdosed.
Right.
On something. I don't think we ever found out what it was. Or maybe we did. I don't know. There's so many medications being thrown around.
I think they do say what it is, and whatever it is a thing that specifically that a nurse would choose because she knows there will be less chance of saving her.
Right.
Because it's more quick acting.
And so she has tried to commit suicide, and now she's in her own ER, and they're trying to figure out why she would do something like that. And that's when Dr. Green says, "We don't care when other people come in, why they did that. We just deal with the problem. So we don't care now why she did that or whatever."
That's right. And the audience is saying, "But we do care. We're a bunch of writers. Why would you kill herself? It seemed like she would have been so happy with George Clooney."
Carol, what are you doing? But yeah, I mean, and you can see how intense that would be if there was something like that went on.
But the other thing is in how few brushstrokes they establish that she is one of the key rocks of this department, and then of course everyone react that way because she's the person who can handle everything. Let me ask you a question: when she's leaving, like to go kill herself, she is basically like, "I'm off the clock. Sorry, I'm off the clock." And most of the people are like, "Ugh, now I got to go do this thing that I wanted to, shove into a nurse's hands." Which has already been sort of established in this perfect little subtle way with Benton wanting them to make the coffee, the nurses to make the coffee, and Margulies saying, "It's not my issue." Just a perfect example of setting up the information you need without tipping your hand.
Right.
So then she's like saying, no, and it's only the last nurse that is asking her for something. And she says, you're going to have somebody else. And he kind of reacts like, "Oh, no, that's a little And that's the only moment I have of just like, oh, that's because the other people that are asked are just like, I got to go take care of it then. Do you think she always, because when I first saw her doing that throughout the pilot, I was like, you know what, good for this lady. She's good at drawing her boundaries. She's good at saying like, well, like my job is this, my job is not that, which would be essential emotionally in that job. But then at the end, I'm wondering, oh, maybe she is a person who will take care of whatever you need whenever you need it.
Right.
And it's only because this day she's like,
Things are different.
yeah. So what do you think it is?
She's like, I'm not just off the clock. I am off the clock.
And then winks at the camera.
Yeah. That's what they would have done on a different pilot.
That's right. In our pilot, our medical pilot.
I don't know. I think that's a good point. I get too caught up in those moments of, because that is a famous thing about nurses, is that when they're going off shift, that's not when you want to have a problem, because they're going to get the fuck out of there instead of getting involved in something that's going to keep them working.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience in the hospital myself without getting into detail. So I'm lost in my own head going like, of course she wants to get out of there, as opposed to like still just processing the pilot in that moment. So I think that's an interesting point that you're raising, which is maybe this other nurse is used to her going, okay, I know I'm supposed to be leaving, but I'm going to help you out, even though it's not my job right now. And this time, this nurse is a little surprised that she's like, I can't help you because I'm going home to do something that I can't say out loud because it's going to be a big reveal later in the episode.
So there's a big comical shrug. What is it?
But I do find that happens to me sometimes as I get taken out of the show because I'm too busy relating it to my own personal experience.
Right.
You know? And that definitely happened in that moment.
I will say there are so many moments in this show, since we're talking about the dark moments in the show.
It's always dark. The lighting was terrible.
Well, no, I don't mean literally. I meant tonally and thematically. So that's one of the moments is Juliana Margulies, Nurse Hathaway, attempting to kill herself, because I had forgotten it completely. And then I remembered that that's like a lot of the early arc is about that and the sort of, the blowback.
So they don't come back in episode 2 and it's like, well, she recovered. She's back.
It's not my memory. So that's one thing that hit me harder than I would have been. Because I've already seen the pilot.
Right.
The moment, as you were referring to, with the guy and the whole cyst that Mark Green telling, and we kind of see it coming. And Mark Green, that's another situation where Mark Green is just like, all right, I have to just give you the information, which is, I believe, part of Dr. Protocol in that situation. And
wait, which one was Dr. Protocol?
Dr. Protocol was Bill Macy. They don't say his name. He says, we're going to go by the book, or my name isn't Dr. Protocol.
It's too literal.
I don't know why Green is wearing green the whole time. It's more of a sort of an off turquoise. What would you call that? A mint teal. It's a mint.
Yeah.
It should have been Dr. Mint. In that moment, I do remember watching that originally. I remember just thinking, as a younger man, just like, Dr. Green's a really good guy. He really sort of took care of this guy. And when I'm watching him now, I'm just like, we're all so fragile. Don't you love God?
Oh, absolutely. Your experience of things changes depending on where you are in your life.
Oh my God. We're all just floating around on this big blink globe.
The end has begun. Yeah.
And then there's a couple of different moments like that, because there are several deaths in the show, which is really admirable. They don't lean on them. They do have the one moment with the guy who's worried about workers' comp,
where they have the shot of the dead body in the next bed.
Right.
Yeah.
And the only exchange, and does this happen after or before? I think it happens after Susan Lewis's Miguel Ferrer scene, but she sort of gives a look to Dr. Green, where that's like one of the only times she lets the emotion show on her face in the show. And the only reaction he has is not to really react to that, but to react to the guy being flippant about life and his concerns when there's a corpse right next to him, which in fairness is like, the guy knows that, but he doesn't know what's going on.
Right.
He's got his own problems.
He's in the hospital, in the ER, trying to get his leg taken care of. Or whatever.
Anyway, it really it's an interesting patchwork of showing the essential thing underneath all of this, which is people sort of fighting away death. And sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail, sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it doesn't.
And you never know for sure which way it's going to go.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk about Dr. Ross. Let's talk about Dr. Ross for a second.
Dreamy Dr. Ross.
Said was it
Dr. Dreamy.
Yeah.
Like you invented it, Grey's Anatomy.
Right. So he first shows up. We don't realize he's a doctor right away. We realize that he's just a drunk. And then within, you can't really tell how long, but it's definitely like he never goes home. He gets fluids and all of a sudden he's working on patients.
Right.
And he's a pediatrician who's great at his pediatricianness.
Nutritioning?
Whatever it's called. And
he's also popular with the ladies.
right. Juliana Margulies wants to kill herself. That has something to do with him.
We don't know that for sure.
Right. And we find out in episode 6 that I never watched the show.
I actually don't remember how much that plays in. I assume it's sort of a sub issue.
It has to be part of it. Otherwise, like, it just felt so much a part of it the way the show unfolded. Like, they said something that was a significant thing to her. She seemed regretting after she walked away from him.
Seems like that would be, I don't know. We'll have to watch the rest of the series.
I guess so. But he has a big arc towards the end of the episode. He has a big story moment towards the end of the episode. He has some funny, he has the kid who swallowed the key and the well, it's not funny, but the kid who has an ulcer because his mother is so overbearing or whatever.
Right.
But then towards the end, he has this very dramatic thing with a baby who has been abused, and he deals with that and with social services.
Right. And it's one of the only, more classic network drama moments of him sort of giving his speech.
How dare you? Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I guess this is what I'm saying about sort of the discussion of whether there is a story arc or not. If you chart him from the beginning, comes in drunk,
right?
Like, is this guy a bad doctor? Green immediately dispels it. He's like, well, he never gets drunk on duty.
Right. He's like a character in
Light
Pinafore.
No, yeah. HMS Pinafore. What character is that?
Oh, it's one of the songs, like Never
He's just trying to lead into doing one of the HMS Pinafore songs again, folks. Buckle up.
No, the reason I say that is because it's like a line that Aaron Sorkin has used over and over again in various things about never ever drunk at sea or something like that.
Sorkinism.
Yeah.
So they established that at the beginning. Then there's the overbearing mother, and it's sort of this question of like, well, how invested is he? Like, yes, he jumps into the fray and does what he's got to do and says, well, this isn't pediatrician work, and backs off when he needs to. And, we know he's beautiful and he's sort of charming, but it's like, we don't really have.
He's been in a bunch of failed pilots.
We know he was in the Art of Being Nick, I believe. Was that it? Was he in the spin-off of Facts of Life, or maybe it was
he was in Facts of Life
later on?
Yeah.
I don't think he was in the Art of Being Nick. That would be too much doubling up with Nick. We got to do Art of Being Nick. Maybe that'll be the follow-up one after we do Family Time. Do you even know what the Art of Being Nick is?
No idea.
The Art of Being Nick is the spin-off of do you remember the Nick character in Facts of Life? It was Mallory's boyfriend. Mallory's, quote, dumb boyfriend. It was all dumb, sort of Woody-style jokes. And then they were like, this guy's got it. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus was in that one.
Amazing.
I think, as far as I know, it only went one.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. We'll find out.
Her only failure.
Her only failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, where was the Julia Louis-Dreyfus, George Clooney
Magic
spin-off? Anyway, so he was you're totally right, and it's maybe something to talk about now. He was this journeyman actor who you would look at and go, why isn't that guy a movie star?
Right. Well, and I think Clooney, I don't know what year it was, but it was like 94 or 95 was when the vampire movie he was in, the Tarantino script that Robert Rodriguez made.
Dusk Till Dawn.
Dusk Till Dawn came out, and I had not watched ER at that point, but it was like, I saw it from Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit, this guy is a fucking star.
That's amazing. You saw Dusk Till Dawn before ER.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, this guy, who is this guy? He's amazing. And then it was like, oh, he's been on ER for a couple of years now,
It's interesting to look at the career of George Clooney because he's like, you're absolutely right. You look at him in Dusk Till Dawn, independent of any information.
Right.
Like, one of the all-time most magnetic,
Incredible.
beautiful,
Yeah.
Talented individuals that ever lived. And you would think, oh, well, that guy is somehow going to be even bigger, if it's possible, than George Clooney was.
Right.
But he went into Batman. The Batman predated? No, it was after.
Yeah.
And I don't think that hindered his career. I just think that might have influenced him to go like, all right, I got to take a handle on my career, do legitimate projects that I'm interested in. And that's a choice at a certain point where it's like, okay, I'm not going to be the Tom Cruise perpetually hottest star in the universe.
I want to do interesting things.
I want to do interesting things. And so it's funny because that reason it's just like, he's got a body of work, but he's really, amazing and proud of as Tom Cruise. No shade on Tom Cruise.
Different reason.
Right. But it's interesting looking at the arc of that career. Because you're right.
Tom Cruise spent a year practicing driving a motorcycle off a ramp and then having a parachute open over him. That's a different thing than George Clooney.
Yeah. Now you would have done that except for your knees, right, Sean?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get up there with the birds. I just want to watch them.
Well, that's the reason you couldn't go up there, because you would have been looking at binoculars, not paying attention when I pull the ripcord up.
Right.
What were we
talking about? Dr. Ross.
Dr. Ross. So I guess my argument is, I think the genius aspect of this pilot is that you are following arcs, because you can track it from he comes in drunk, we don't know what's going on, we don't know how serious he is, we don't know if he's a good pediatrician, to him standing up to this mother in this incredibly upsetting situation for good. You've seen him be a good doctor, of course, making us even more enamored of him. And it's sort of like this, and to me, that connects back to point one of, that is why this guy is drinking. Because he is dealing with situations like this on a daily basis.
Let's not forget also that he gets put in his place by his brand new medical student who's come to work with them. Because he immediately starts hitting on her, and she's like, let's keep this professional.
Right. But she's more harsh, and she's justifiably harsh.
Yeah. Although then later on, right, he screams at her, and she responds to that by saying, let's hang out.
That's a very cynical way to interpret that, John. I interpreted that as, by that point in the show, she has seen him act in such a noble fashion that she has sympathy for him as a person and sees his value as a person. Because it is, I guess, immediately after that.
Right after that.
So, okay. So we're open to each other.
He's like, what the hell are you doing? What's wrong with you? And she's like, I can't find it. And then he comes out to her and it's like, sorry, I yelled. She's like, let's hang out. Why don't we?
I choose to give her the benefit of the doubt.
I just give doubt. That's all I give.
Just not drawn to bad boys.
Yeah. But here's, just to go to his story arc, I don't disagree that you can trace everything back to the drinking, and it's connected to what he has to deal with. The horror of that story is overwhelming. Right. Seeing something like that in real life would just be so shocking and so upsetting.
Right.
And
it's part of a pattern that clearly he's seen before, because he knows what it is immediately.
Right. But part of what I think is interesting about the show, and why I say it's so much about them just being in the world as opposed to their stories, is because everything is stuff that's happening to him. It's not like he goes, here's my problem that I'm trying to solve.
Right.
It's all just like, here's the next thing that comes in. Here's the next thing.
Well, that's why it's just so impressive to build a series this way. Mm-hmm. And it was only in Dr. Lewis's arc over the series that I am like, I don't want to waste time on these patients. I want to see what's happening with Dr. Lewis. And I think that's the reason I had that issue at the end. But everything else is so, even not as well handled, and I'm just a maniac. But everything's so well handled in terms of giving us just enough, pulling us in to what's going on in their personal lives, what their personal struggles are, but having it mostly be activated, as you're saying, by the problems and tragedies and funny things of the moments of the patients coming in. And that's such an incredibly delicate balance to draw.
It's a hard way to write it.
Because you're writing it sort of more toward a soap, which is that Grey's Anatomy was just like, all right, well, we're going to take out a lot of the patient stuff, and we're going to add, at least, I don't know, what would it be, 40, 50% more nighttime soap. This has nighttime soap or ongoing, arcs for the characters. And I would argue that you can see them in this. And I think it's subtle. It's sort of beneath the surface. You establish their struggles, but you're not having them state it all the time. And I think that also can be played out and seen in the Noah Wyle character, Dr. Carter, John Carter of Mars.
Yeah, Barsoom.
Whereas he's the rookie, he's the Michael Jordan of this ward in baseball.
Yeah, well, like Jordan coming into baseball having played basketball, Noah Wyle Dr. Carter comes into the emergency room having done psychiatry and dermatology. That's all he's done, which is like, it's funny to me that doctors would have a thing where they would look down on somebody for being not as exciting as they are because of the specialties he's been involved in. And Noah Wyle has been involved in psychiatry and dermatology. And the ER people are like, those are nothing. Who cares about that stuff?
Right.
We're the real doctors.
Right.
And they look down on him for that and for having a tailored lab coat. Like they're very upset with him for that.
By the way, also a fantastic character detail that you wouldn't have noted to look at him. So you need the other characters to call it out.
Point it out.
That's fantastic exposition without really saying anything about the character. We don't know almost anything about Dr. Carter,
Right.
Other than, what he was sort of studying. It's all in behavior. And I guess that's the thing, is we're learning about each of these characters through their behavior, not through exposition, which not in the right hands can be frustrating. And in this pilot, it's completely satisfying. And it goes from him being completely out of his depth, and Benton is kind of, running him through the ringer, and, he's slowly figuring stuff out. And it's also, he's a great balance of, okay, he can kind of handle it. He is doing okay. And then he's going to throw up when he sees the knife wound, and you can see his humanity. And that's when you have the great moment with Dr. Green, which is another perfect example of like Dr. Green at that point, because we've seen Dr. Green clearly has some problems with his wife. I feel like they present his wife as very patient and good-humored and flirty and understanding in that scene. And I thought, based on the way that Ross is talking to him, I was thinking, this is going to be a classic kind of, Battle Axe old TV character.
Right.
And she's just like, she seems incredibly patient based on what's happening, especially since at the end of the pilot, he's sort of like, I'm going to give this up. And no, your wife called. I forgot again.
That old Battle Axe.
And he's like offered this fantastic position. What do you think about the rich doctors?
It was a little over the top.
Yeah, it was a little over the top.
Well, we have the place in Aspen. Have you ever been skiing? No, I really haven't had the inclination. Oh, you've got to try. It's a wonderful sport.
You can say those conventions in Maui and Paris.
Also, like that it's his first job interview, and he's just laying out like these are all the things. This is your dream come true.
Yeah,
you get this.
Well, I took it to be like he's one of the hot shots. If you've gone through ER, then you're hireable anywhere. So I don't know. But anyway, he goes through that, and then at the end, before the scene I'm talking about, you have the scene with Carter, where Carter has just dealt with this thing. He's kind of felt embarrassed. He's felt like he's failed. You can tell again beneath the surface, maybe he can't hack this. And he comes out and he's like, basically this is sort of the deal. You're gonna feel this way. You're gonna throw up. Benton did too. Kind of gives him some emotional, ammunition against Benton, because he knows that
like either you hold on to those feelings or you don't.
Such a great another theme, because that I think really is like that's what each character is doing, and those are the through lines. The characters are like, are they holding onto it? Or are they letting it go? And him saying, sometimes I just want to quit. And you're like, oh, okay, here's it going to be. He's going to say why he doesn't want to quit. And I'm like, what happened? What's going on? He answers it in the lecture scene, and he doesn't really answer it.
The mystery box.
It's a mystery box. It's just like, what's the smoke monster? But then he doesn't answer it when he's in the scene. He just says like, what, I'm going to quit this? And it's like, what do you mean? You don't get any sleep? This is all this upsetting stuff. And it's like, this is what he was meant to do. And that's sort of, it's not all the information we need, but it's all we need for this episode.
and I don't remember the order of when these things happen, but there's also the moment for Dr. Carter where he gets to see the baby being born. He's involved in the birth of the baby.
Right.
And you can see him in that moment fall in love with working in the ER. Like, he has that moment of contemplation of like the wonder of life being brought into the world. And this is a thing that I could see myself doing.
Absolutely. The amazing things are that it balances bright moments like that and moments filled with light with the dark moments like Miguel Ferrer and the child abuse plot. And I looked to see, is that in the script? The moment when the lady in the French maid outfit.
Oh, yeah.
walks
Just
in,
for a second.
and it's described in the script as a waitress in a French maid. Like, well, what? How do we know she's a waitress?
Right.
How's that important? That's one thing. But then there's also the I guess they got to find their sexy moment.
The college student with the burned
The
thigh.
college moment played by Liz Bassey, just a mainstay of again, in a million pilots. She was in the tech, just mainstay at that point in time. And just that comedic beat, the old woman.
Oh, I love the old woman thing where
Mrs.
she's
Raskin.
so Mrs. Raskin, because that was every person around my Thanksgiving dinner table when I was a kid growing up.
Just having
Just weird old people with delusional ideas of their place in the world.
just the balance of this, and particularly like a lot of those moments are in what you would call the last act, and the breakdown of like going back and forth between these dark moments and these light moments in such a sure-handed fashion.
Right.
It's like that I would have to give, I mean, I guess you got to give credit to everyone involved, but just like, because that continued throughout the series, John Wells had to be sort of have an eye on it. It might just be that Michael Crichton is a master storyteller, but it's like, how do you balance that? And I could see from that perspective, I can see the top brass, those people.
That's what I was going to say. You got to give some credit to the top brass, you know?
But they didn't like it. And I could see, you look at that in the script, you're like, what is this? What's going on? Because a lot of it only hangs together if you have the eyes to see it in the script in a way where you're not reading straight story, or you're able to sort of see the potential on screen. And by the way, the reason that this show eventually did defeat the sort of negative vibe on the network side and get on the air was just the testing. Like, they didn't think well of it, and it tested through the roof, and they're like, all right, I guess we're wrong.
We got to do this.
But you got to give credit to the top brass on
I'm
that.
gonna get rid of some of my brass because I don't deserve it anymore.
The last question I have is about Dr. Benton, who's just fantastically played by Eric Lasalle. And I think my memory was not liking the character. And now that I watch that character, I'm like, how did I not like this character? Because he's so, and I think I was just like, he's being to Dr. Carter, and he's a hard ass.
He's arrogant.
He's arrogant.
You know? But he gets humbled in this episode. You know, he has to eat humble pie, as they say about pie that is humble. When the lady whose husband's life he saved says, "Thank goodness Dr. Morgenstern turned up at the right time."
Well, this is a moment I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Is he eating humble pie? Well, for question number one is that racism that's being, is there intention that the show is displaying race as a subtle form of racism?
It could be. I didn't think of it that way.
Because I also wondered, or is it just being presented that Dr. Morgenstern, Bill Macy's character, was just like, yes, that's right, I did it. I guess he did a little bit.
I think there are, and also those people might know who Dr. Morgenstern was and not know who Dr. Benton was.
It also just, might be a classist thing, which is interesting.
No. I mean, like, if you're going into the hospital, you might know, like, oh, this is the heart surgeon you're going to deal with.
I see.
Because those people are specialists, and they're people that, like, there was literally a guy I dealt with at NYU who they were like, this guy is the George Clooney of this type of doctor. Like, they're hot shots.
Million failed pilots, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, he was in The Art of Being Nick. But they are hot shots, and people know who they are. They're like the fighter pilots of those big organizations, you know?
Fighter co-pilots? I'm never going to let you get to the end of this point.
But I felt like they might know who he was because they were dealing with this guy's heart issue before.
Right.
And so they could have been involved with Dr. Morgenstern. So I saw it as like they had a connection to him, and he showed up, and they're like, okay, everything's fine now because Dr. Morgenstern got here, you know?
Yes, you're right. It might just be, it was unclear, and it doesn't really matter. It was just sort of like, oh, I wonder if there's another thing. But what is interesting is you're saying Benton eats humble pie, whereas I feel like he's kind of almost smiling in that moment. And I wasn't sure if it's just like he knows he did the right thing, so he doesn't need the credit, or is it just like, all right, that's the way it goes. That's politics.
You might be right. I saw it as him like holding back from telling that lady, I'm the one who saved his life.
Right.
Morgenstern didn't do the life saving. He came in after the hard part was over. I made the call. I'm the one who saved his life. And there was just no way to
Say it.
explain that to her.
Right.
So he had to just be like, yeah, thank goodness Dr. Morgenstern showed up.
And if you're talking about the arc, that actually works perfectly because the beginning is when the guy's hand is detached.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, it's a lucky day for his orthopedics.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, that's a weird reaction. A guy losing his hand. It's like, because he wants to do it.
Put it back on.
And he's like, he's asking, did they do it? I kept promising them you were going to do it because I know I could do it.
Right.
And he's being arrogant. He's pushing around Carter. And then this moment happens, and it isn't even like he does it out of ego. He does it because he has to save the guy's life. Right. And I also like the vibe of authenticity. That it isn't even he completes the surgery. It's that he has to buy time until Morgenstern gets there.
He's literally just standing there holding the guy's heart together, basically.
Yeah. And that he saved the guy with the ruptured abdominal aneurysm. And
Oh, I thought it was an aortic aneurysm. That was some kind of aneurysm, you know?
I'm almost positive it's an abdominal aneurysm. I mean, if it was an aortic aneurysm, actually, I don't remember.
No, I'm sure you're right.
It seems like I would be the person who was right.
I can't disagree.
I definitely don't have a high hit ratio of being wrong. Whatever the case, the thing that I like is, for me, the little victory is that in saving that guy, he gets his title credits fist bump as a reward. So there for I think the remainder of the series is him doing that.
The karate thing?
Yeah. It's there for the rest of the series. I guess what
I about that. What a funny moment where he's just by himself in the hallway.
Yeah, it seems so off character that I was sort of like, when does that happen? It happened in the pilot. I guess I'm saying arc wise, it starts from him being arrogant, him like, I got to get in the game, and then at the end, it's like I think there's an element, even though there's sort of whistling in the dark in the surgery scene, of him realizing this guy could die on my watch, and I think that connects to. I'm realizing in that scene that he doesn't say anything because it's just like, I won because I saved this person's life, which is why I really do this. Even though he's all bluster and ego and, his ego is real, I think that's what comes full circle. And none of it is discussed. It's just for us to kind of look beneath what's being presented.
The only other one I wanted to talk about, we don't have to get really into it because we've already discussed most of it anyway, but just the idea that Dr. Green starts asleep and ends the episode asleep. It's like a nice button on the way things work in the ER, that it's the same shit over and over again.
Yeah.
I get why they do it because it makes him a more interesting character, but what are the chances he takes the job? He's the main character in the pilot.
Yeah.
What are the chances he takes the job with the other clinic?
0.
Yeah. So it's just hard. I always have a hard time buying that stuff because I'm like, oh, they're going to start a new show in the second episode where he goes off to Aspen to learn how to ski.
Are you arguing that it's schmuckbait?
Yeah, a little bit.
We described schmuckbait on the show.
I think it's worth describing it, yeah.
Kevin's saying yes. But it's basically a false potential of turn of plot that you're presenting and the audience knows.
So the whole thing is about whether he's going to take this other job or not.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a little bit schmuckbaity from the beginning.
See, I guess my experience of it was because we don't know what the job is, because we don't know what's at stake, because until we see the job offer, that's when the pieces fall into place of like, oh, this is the way out that his wife wants him to take so she can spend more time with, his family. He can spend more time with his family. That's when it fell into place. So because it was spilled out to us in that way, in that sort of slow-paced way, I didn't feel like I already knew that was what the deal was going in, and therefore I was like, oh, is he going to take the job or not? I think I was just like, oh, what's the next thing? You felt like you were like, they wanted you to go.
That's what I felt like I was supposed to do, is to buy into whether or not this was a real thing.
Do you mean after this pilot is over or in the pilot itself?
In the pilot itself.
Right. Yeah, I think obviously, that is the case. But I guess at this point, I'm not that invested, even though they've established the problems he's sort of having in spending time with his family. I don't think that they've established it at such a breaking point that I'm like, is he going to leave? Is he going to leave in this pilot? I think it's just sort of setting up the stuff. But to your point about the ending, a lot of times, and it's always a little bit of a dual thing that they're asking for in terms of studios and networks. Of they kind of want the pilots to end in a place of like, do you think, like asking the either the people who are testing it or the audience, do you see where this would go next? Does it make sense? Like, what do you think would happen? Can you imagine? And also, do you think it could continue? What do you think would happen?
Would it be weird if in episode 2 it turned out that everybody who works at the hospital is an orphan?
And I feel like that is a little bit almost the purpose. I mean, I think dramatically, I think it does work well that he ends exactly where he began.
Right.
But also, that is in essence saying this is what the show's going to be.
It'll be the same thing over and over again. But I think you look at it and you go, of course it's going to be the same thing over and over again. What's going to be different is the specifics of the people coming into the hospital.
Right.
Because that's not the same every time. And people's lives go on. These doctors' lives go on. So however they're dealing with their own issues is going to change over time.
One thing that's sort of a side interesting thing is, which comes as no surprise that I looked at all the Sherry Springfield scenes in the script, the Dr. Lewis scenes. The one offshoot of her talking to her apparently ex-boyfriend and saying, I thought we were broken up, which I love. She's not even sure. We have a conversation. I thought we resolved it. What's going on? And so you can't tell if it's like, this guy, I got to get rid of him. Or didn't I deal with this? It's probably more, didn't I deal with this emotional situation? In the pilot script, she just goes in to see a patient and her boyfriend is there pretending he's a patient. It's the only time he can get time with her. And then it is sort of unclear whether they've broken up or not. And it ends in a way that is established in an even subtler way in a later scene with Mark Green, where they're talking about, I thought you guys were broken up. And she's kind of like, kind of like, we're still messing around, basically. It's like, who's got time?
Right.
And that's kind of where that scene, he's like, gives her a full court press. And she's like, I don't know. And he's like, neat. And she's like, wait, get off. It's like this incredibly late time. Well, come and meet me. And she's like, yeah, all right. And it's funny that the same information is communicated in just a subtle, like, you catch it or you don't kind of way.
Right.
Which is, again, if there were heavier notes, you never would have seen that.
Right. If the brass was really doing their job.
No aspersions on brass that time, FYI.
We love the brass.
Warren Littlefield was a producer after he left being with Network Brass on a couple of my pilots, and was a gentleman. I know there's a lot of people who had mixed experiences when he's the network president, and what are you going to do? That's going to be an antagonistic relationship. But he was a delight to me.
I just remember him one time saying, Andy, enjoy this.
That lesson did not sting, though.
Well, that's the pilot. I just wanted to do one thing before we leave. I texted my cousin. I don't know if you know this about me. I have a lot of cousins.
He has, I believe, 1,576 cousins.
So many. And I have one cousin who has been an ER doctor for years and years.
Oh, boy.
In a large northwestern state.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I'm recording this thing about ER. Have you ever watched the show? And do you feel like it's an accurate representation? And I just wanted to read you what his response was.
Please.
The only reason I went into ER was because I thought I was going to be having tons of sex in the storeroom. Total bullshit. I still haven't had sex in a storeroom. I will say a lot of the drama is pretty real. A lot of horrible moments. I've spent a lot of time crying in the ambulance bay by myself. That part is definitely real. Everyone who works here is totally addicted to something they get here, even though all they do is complain about it. I think we have a kinship with the addicts because at heart, we are the same. And then he says, I don't remember much of the show. I do know that the docs in the show seemed a lot more hands-on. I tend to stand back quite a bit and chew on my sandwich while massive drama is unfolding. I don't think that would make for a very good show, but most docs are not involved in physical confrontations, holding people down, or anything all that physical. We tend to look like aloof assholes in the background. I think it's because we're trying to pretend that we're wise and are taking in the whole room. But really, we're just eating our sandwich and wondering how little we can do and still keep our job. Pretty much like every job. Don't get me in trouble with that quote. You can just say, Timmy, whose last name is not X, who does not work in Y city. I'm obviously changing names to protect the guilty.
Trying the property in Y City.
And then he says at the end, this is really the last thing he says. The only person I'm really worried about hearing you saying this is your mother. So he's afraid of my mother, basically. The only
Just like you.
She's a terrifying.
I mean, my main read on that is storeroom, a medical storeroom. Sounds like me an incredibly terrifying place. I mean, I've had sex in some, off the beaten path places, but
not sharps around, as they say.
Possible syringes in the room.
Yeah, sharps they call them.
Oh, those are sharps. Sorry, you're the one with the medical personnel in the family.
Right.
Thank your cousin for writing it.
I just thought it was funny that he was like, the only thing that's off is that anybody would ever do anything physical.
Yeah, that's. By the way, that would make it fantastic. The the doctor standing around
Eating a sandwich.
Yeah. So there we are.
That's ER.
We rhymed. We did we intend to? Who knows?
There we are.
And it's time for your sign-off catchphrase, Sean.
We'll see you next time when we'll be coming in for a landing.